So, I mean, that's what I was gonna bypass the sign part. I thought a lot of people have opinions about that, so good. So the part that, that concerns me is on what I numbered as page 7 of the proposed local law.
Mhm.
And it's the starting place. Actually, I have 3 issues. The first one is the starting place where it says the ZBA.
Yeah.
And this is in. let me see.
here's some footsteps.
Hmm?
Okay.
That's saying, please, officially.
That way?
Yeah. No, go ahead.
Okay,
Maybe.
so the zoning board has no jurisdiction regarding the granting of variances for electronic message board signs. And I believe that needs to be looked into in great detail and get a judgment from the Department of State or whoever they go to, because the Dansky Boom Book is the ZBA is the only board that can interpret the terms of the ordinance or the law. Then we have the appellate jurisdiction. We hear requests for relief from determinations of the code enforcement officer. And both the ZBA and the planning board are administrative boards. The Board of Trustees is a legislative body. So if the ZBA, as Sheldon and James say, is the only board with the power to interpret the law or ordinance, and this proposes language that says that the ZBA has no jurisdiction, then does that mean they're going to give the appellate jurisdiction to the planning board? Or does it mean that an applicant will have no possible route to appeal? So I think that needs to be examined.
I had a similar concern, but I think the next section seems to indicate that that would go to the village board of trustees.
Right, and it can't. So that's the same problem. I have the next one is the special use permit. And it says, and the village law says that you have to apply to an administrative body, either the planning board or the ZBA, but you cannot apply to a legislative body for a special use permit. So that needs to be looked into as well. Okay. And then the last part, well, this isn't the last part, this is sort of part and parcel of that, is down at the bottom where it says B, the application for a sign permit should be made in writing, duplicate, blah, blah, provided by the code enforcement officer to the code enforcement officer. But the proposed language, which I'm hoping will be changed, says that up there in 4A, that it's going to be made to the village board of trustees. So there's an inherent conflict there. All right, you see what I'm talking about?
I see B part 1.
B part 1 says that you make the application to the code enforcement officer, but 4A, which I'm questioning, says that you make the application to the board of trustees. So I'm just throwing that out for them to look at and reconcile that.
I would read 4B1 as saying that the sign application, I mean, any LED sign,
Mhm.
does every sign require an application?
I don't know, but I just think they should just clarify it as they look over it. So I'm just throwing it out there as something that I saw. And in that, if the application goes to the code enforcement officer, the ZBA are supposed to be appealing decisions of the code enforcement officer. And if the application goes to the code enforcement officer, but the ZBA has no jurisdiction, then does an applicant, again, have no recourse to a negative decision? So that I think needs to be looked at. And then on
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
yeah, go ahead.
Joan, are you in charge of capturing all of this discussion, or
No,
Okay.
so
So why are we
what is
talking?
the outcome of this here?
This is recorded and a transcript can be gotten after from the recording itself. So that's
Okay.
what's being recorded, obviously being streamed for anyone else to watch it. So Joan was taking down, like she did in the planning, you took down some basic information, something, or some basic suggestions. The planning board, we're all here, went through a, 1, 2, 3 kind of thing.
When you come to conclusions, your
Well,
final recommendation.
That's what she will actually put in
Okay,
the minutes.
because I thought we were just discussing, so I'm not making recommendations. I'm just saying, I'm seeing things.
This discussion can be a recommendation. You just made 3, said, look at, those are 3 recommendations. So that's a recommendation to look at it and
All right.
maybe perhaps do something about it.
This is just the last one. Jen is, but I'm just throwing it out there, and I don't know how it could be accomplished. But it seems to me that on D, it says written consent of the owner, that on the property that the signs to be erected. That's in the event that the applicant is not the owner. But I would like the village to consider somehow that the applicant is made by the building owner or a lessee. And the permission being specific to the applicant and that it doesn't run with the land like zoning generally does. So I don't know how they would do that, or if they could do that. But normally, like, we give permission, yeah, you can put up a garage, well, that garage stays. But a sign is movable, and these signs are these signs are particular. When a person applies for a sign, it is because I want people to know that you can get your medical care here. So when that property is now occupied by a grocery store,
You don't want to grandfather in.
right, or do we hand the sign over? Or you have properties, and there are some in the village that is owned both business and residential, they cross a line. So the business part could apply for a sign, and then the property is turned into 100% residence, and then person could put whatever they liked on the sign, come for dinner at 6:30. So I don't know how, whether it would be accomplished through this or there's some other mechanism, but I'm just throwing it out for it to be considered.
Good point.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I like it. Joan, we've got someone from the public in the room.
I believe from the press.
Oh,
Gotta have a name.
I know.
Kevin Conlon,
Kevin Conlon.
Conlon.
Kevin Conlon,
Yes,
Cortland Standard.
yes,
Is that who you're representing, Kevin?
yes, I am.
Thank you.
That's my 2 cents.
Yep.
Nothing
Yeah, you said-
about the signs themselves or where this is considering them to go, but I'll talk. It might be loud and clear at a bigger meeting with a lot of people. So,
Yeah. I kind of had a couple points to go through on this as well. Along with Dante's notes there, I did see that it's currently written that there's an exception for churches and schools and other zoning districts. And that would kind of that would open up Main Street to having these signs potentially. So that
Unless the central business district is disallowed.
Yep.
Specifically.
but what page is that on where it says the churches and schools?
Yeah.
On
it's
our,
under F1.
yeah, thank you. It says churches and schools in all other zoning districts. So the CBD and
Right,
R1 and, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
So that was the concern for me. The exception for just below that,
Mhm.
in A, the first exception,
Mhm.
municipal or emergency information
Yeah.
displayed for destruction. Is that a temporary sign? Dan, do you know what the intent of that wording is?
Sorry, I'm looking at the wording of what you guys were just talking about. I believe the wording states just churches and schools in those other zoning districts. Would be
In
open
all other zoning districts is what mine says.
by churches and schools in all other zoning districts, that only a church or school, of which the planning board brought up last time, that nonprofits perhaps should be added to that list. But it's not, no other kind of business or anything else. It's only a church or
Church
school
or school or a nonprofit, anywhere,
in other zoning districts, yeah.
right?
So, well, I'm just saying nonprofits out there. I'm not saying that's gonna go in there. I'm saying that was a suggestion by them.
Yeah, I can see that suggestion, but my concern isn't who's included, it's that that exception exists. Because I mean, if you're going to limit it to business districts and then open it up with that, I feel like,
Right.
Well, I think it's also just perhaps just capturing that the church out of this on the green was, even though it's pretty much grandfathered in, that kind of captures that. And then schools in and of themselves, where they are, 3 school properties, they want to have an LED sign of some kind, and perhaps through this law, they would be allowed. Not saying that's gonna end on the final draft, but.
well, I'm just giving my opinion. I don't want that.
Right, you just said it, but I thought you said, well, that may open it up to Main Street. I don't think that language says that.
Does it open up to anywhere?
Well, there's the church on Main Street.
Anywhere?
The church and school, but it's not, it's just the church or school. It's not, so
On Main Street? Or anywhere they happen to
those
be?
churches already have a LED sign.
Yeah, but there can be other churches. For a time, there was a church in the residence across the street from me. They held services every Sunday and they were the church of, I don't know what, but they could have one.
Right, so, again,
But that forces
They may just say
what you're
no.
saying.
but I took your note of saying just on Main Street as one of the businesses in Central Business District.
No,
So I
no, I didn't know.
I
that.
misunderstood.
I'm just saying that that could allow a sign in front of the elementary school or a sign in front of the
High
church.
school.
The high school, well, the high school would almost. Is the high school in a business district?
I have to
I,
get that map.
But the Center for the
No, I think
Arts,
they're in
it
arts,
could
too.
allow us an electric sign in front of the Center for the Arts.
Right, and that's obviously one of the interesting parties here.
It's not. Can I read something that fits into what I think you're saying? This is from again our book that we were given. It says this was a planning board decision that they are referring to, but it seems to be telling in terms of where these can go. It says the planning board's conclusions with respect to the negative aesthetic impact of the project as a whole are substantiated by the record, given the location of the project as the Western Gateway, and this is a particular case, into a community noted for its rustic nature and striking scenery, and the fact that a store and parking lot would lie partially within. This decision is talking about what these people were asking for, affecting the feeling of the community that they were going to. And that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
you
that's-
say.
I personally, I don't like the idea of LED signs. I can understand a case to be made in like on 281, that corridor. I would strongly oppose them like in the village on Main Street. So the fire department, the churches, the schools, I would be against that.
I would as well.
And so I want to call attention to anything in the law that would allow that.
Sure.
I don't get to write the law, but that I want to make sure that that's clear that that is the way it's written, that would be allowed. So that was that was what I was bringing up.
On the exception one that you raised, that the municipal emergency information, I assume can be displayed at the discretion of the mayor. He could say like, red alert, go to your basement or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I was just wondering what that exception meant. Is that a temporary sign, like the construction LED sign that can move somewhere, or would that be something like?
I think
an
the exception is the number 2. The A is an exception to 2, that information needs to pertain only to the business, the structure, the property at hand. However,
In an emergency, we could.
may commandeer the LED signs to elicit information to the general public.
Okay, if that's the intent, then I can understand that. I would
I'd
agree.
like to just suggest that they add the mayor or designee. Keeping it at the mayor, one person
Sure.
is really limited.
Yep.
We're
Nope,
talking about an emergency.
nope, yep, you're right,
And
definitely.
Excuse me, Adam,
Yes, Jim.
Dan Zek is in, but he's muted.
Yeah, I just got this thing to work. I was having issues with my computer. How are you, Joan?
I'm fine, Dan. Are you awake?
I am, yes.
Hey, Dan, so it's really just kind of a free form discussion happening right now.
I'm sorry I missed the beginning. I have a question. I know you guys did that sign display, but I didn't understand why it was put on in the parking lot underneath a bright street light. You couldn't tell anything from that display. Why wasn't it set up out on the road where it would be in general where the sign would have been? So when you drive by, you could see how bright it was. Does anyone
You're
know
just
that?
you're discussing the law that they wanna do.
That's a fair question, but it's directed at no one. I don't know who could answer your question, Dan.
I can
Okay.
answer it.
Nope, Dan,
The manufacturer themselves preferred having it back there for demonstration purposes. So there was a notion to bring it up after the hour, pull it up towards the road, but that never occurred.
so they would-
Okay.
they would like
I'm
to-
sorry, I just got in late, but that was my one thing. I went down there to look at the sign to see what this thing would look like. And I drove by and I'm like, I don't even see a sign. And then they had it underneath that bright light, so you couldn't even tell how bright it really was gonna be.
well,
I
if
thought it
someone-
was kind of like smoke and mirrors by the guy that was setting up the display.
if I read between the lines, that's kind of maybe what happened.
Sounds like we all went to the same party.
Yeah, okay, so, I mean, if it was on their dime to show off a sign, I could understand why they would put it in the best position possible for their side of the story. But yeah, that is a concern. I mean, if you want to see an LED sign, you could drive past the CNY Museum. And, I mean, that thing's scrolling and flashing. I think that's a pretty good example of what I would really not like to see anywhere in Homer, but especially in Main Street.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think there's any place on Main Street for a sign like that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I did, so on that same page 6 that we're talking about here, on the very bottom there, that point 8A, when it's actually giving the brightness of the sign should not exceed 0.3 foot candles. That's actually very dim. I mean, I would like a lot to be written that way, but it would be almost imperceptible to have it that dim. So in fairness, I think that we probably want to look at that, what that 0.3 number is.
The demonstration, I put it down to the lowest level was 100 nits, whatever a nit is. I don't know how in relation to 0.3 foot candles that is, I do not know. But it was fairly low.
Yeah.
So, but yet still readable.
Okay.
You don't know the nit to foot candle ratio?
I don't have that mathematical calculation for you. Sorry.
Got a phone?
No.
I forgot my, oh, you do, good.
Sure, do
It's called NIT, N-I-T, or
I think so,
K-N-I-T?
it. I believe NIG.
We'll have to do that offline. I'm not getting an obvious nit answer. Okay. I did have, so as it's written here, the hours of operation between 9 and 6, 9 PM and 6 AM. Are there exceptions for businesses that are operating like that? I mean, like, there's an exception above for a gas station. I just don't want the law to be written so that a gas station isn't not in compliance, because I think it's tied to their business hours. Those LED signs are on all the time.
Right.
But I just wasn't sure as it was written that was captured.
So you're saying it should be only during business hours?
Well, we'd have to have some consideration for like a gas station. Their LED sign is on 24 hours a day because they are open 24 hours a day. Maybe it's a special exemption for them because of their business. But I just wanted to be careful that the law was written to account for that. But I would want it, I want that.
Okay,
I want it to be turned off for everybody else. Maybe from all day.
Now, what about like, I mean, do you think that there's gonna be an issue with like places that, like say hobos wanted to put one up, they should be able to have one on when they're open if the place across the street can, you know what I mean?
I understand that, and I don't know where I read that, but I think I have seen some lighting legislation written that was tied to business hours.
That's what I was thinking as well. I thought that's what the case was.
Yeah, so it's, these are the limits unless you have a business that's open outside.
Las Vegas ordinance probably has that.
I don't think we're gonna look at that one. So Dan, before you got here, I think we did just one thing that I wanted to call your attention to is the way it's worded right now, is that it's permitted in zones B1 and B2, and then also by churches and schools and any other zoning district. And I thought that was pretty open, and that would potentially put a sign on Clinton Street, but potentially put a bigger sign where the church is on the green, elementary school on the green.
What about, yeah, and I mean, there's a church on, what's that? It's not Center Street, but St. Margaret's Church is down in a residential neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
I think that is something, yeah, I agree that that's something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, I would hope that maybe one of our recommends of that at the end of the night would be very strict zoning for these signs without exceptions.
Just B1 and B2, you're thinking?
You know, you don't have to have an ordinance that goes by the districts that we have defined. You can do an overlay ordinance. And so they could take this, and the suggestion was only on 281. They could do an overlay over whatever lines it crosses.
That's a good idea.
281, forget the B1, B2 and whatnot, and just say an overlay district be created to encompass Route 281, they go the east and west side and, or the north and south or whatever, from here to here, and this goes in now.
That's a good idea.
And that is an option then?
Yeah.
To have
I mean,
that
overlay
overlay
zone? Sure.
specific to just the signage?
Yeah,
You can do an overlay district for anything, you know, you can do one on some part of the city and say, we're gonna have special exemptions for people over the age of 80 to be able to have, you know, 10 people in a house.
Right.
Where it's not allowed elsewhere, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that definitely would pinpoint more of the area than just a zoning district.
but I mean, if we did open up 281, I'm looking at the zoning map now, and there's several stretches of 281 that are R2.
Well, you just draw it where you like it, where you
Yeah.
want it. But it doesn't deal, you know, it still needs to deal with your point about the churches, schools, nonprofits and all that. That doesn't address your point there.
I know, I mean, there's several places that want these signs, and where they are, I want to be very careful that's not, I think that goes against the nature of Homer. I mean, the historic look of the town, I think would be affected by that.
I totally agree.
I agree with you, and I think once you start pushing these dominoes over with things like this, then they just fall rapidly, and then we've lost everything. But you know what I mean? And I think that you have to really look at things like this and say, you know, how are these gonna impact us? And for one, it's the first domino to fall of taking the village away from the village.
Yep.
And can you improvise what the preamble to the village plan is, what the point, when they say the goal of how the comprehensive plan is to create the village? Does it say something about the historic nature and
Yep,
all that?
it brings all that in. It also speaks to wanting to move into modern times or into the 21st century, things like that. We're actually getting ready to update our plan. We'll apply for a grant. We'll see if we'll get it. Which it's not going to be very much. The document already exists, but it's mainly hitting corridors like 281, opening that up, and that's also been part of the DRI as well, of bringing in that into Homer. Yes, it's a different little area, but bringing the people that are on 281 down, obviously into Main Street and the Central Business District, but also treating 281 as a part of Homer, and that it's nice. It can be a nice gateway, and there's various other things that we can do on that. Whether LED signs up along in the overlay district
Yeah.
on 281 is a part of that, I don't know.
Well, I'm not asking that. I'm asking that if the comprehensive plan, which the zoning ordinance is supposed to back up and implement, then, and it talks about the nature of the village as a historic nature, and part of it, you know, we want to preserve that and whatever, you know, they should have nice poetry in there. Then I think your point about having these kinds of signs around the village, and like this decision, this court decision of changing that nature of the village is really important and really powerful.
I mean, we don't need to be comparing ourselves against Skinny Alice, but their zoning would not allow for any of these sort of signs in that type of area. And I don't think that anyone would think them of not being up to date or progressing. I just think that there's people can have different opinions on LED signs. I just don't think that that's a representation of progress. So.
Fair enough. And just going back to the comp plan though, economics is punched throughout the document as
But
far
there are lots
as
of
far as the.
historic village, Williamsburg, Virginia, you know, they maintain their historic character, but
They have
they
a-
got economic development coming out of the years.
Sure.
So,
The whole engine of, you know, people in clothing talking about churning butter and whatnot.
there we go.
That's actually the engine. It's a destination zone. So whether Homer can become a destination zone, I don't know.
The Dairy Parade, could bring it to Homer.
Where else to go with this? I'm sorry, I missed the sign manufacturer. I had like a work event in Rochester. Do they provide like after installation measurements of anything? Is that part of when they install a sign? Or is that part of what our legislation could ask for, that they're meeting these standards?
Oh, yeah, it can be very specific in the law that no sign shall be larger than, and I think even the proposed signs, taking 281 out of it, row signs down on the south end of Main Street there are small in nature, pretty much, you know, take Center for the Arts monument sign, the width of whatever that is, where the white background with the black letters, that LED sign is not gonna be any bigger than that.
Doesn't it say though it can be 12 square feet on each side?
I think that's from the ground, so not necessarily that large, but just in the demonstration itself, that was a 4x8. That size of sign would not be allowed.
12 square feet per face sign.
Is that what page you're on?
Page 7 towards the top. 2A, electronic message board sign area.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
Where is that, Adam? Oh, sign area 2A. Okay.
Yeah, page 7.
And the code enforcement officer would be enforcing the code. So the code enforcement officer, is there any, I mean, normally the code enforcement officer works, I guess, on what they observe or somebody complains about. But since this is specific to how many foot candles and how far when measured from the face and all the rest of that. So would the code enforcement officer be looking around and measuring those things and saying, you're up to 22-foot candles and you're only allowed 6, you know?
Yeah, how is that gonna be taken care of?
Just by that process, that if there's something that's out of compliance or appears out of compliance, then investigations would occur and then we would see what other kind of enforcement and or penalty and or, you know, removal might happen. I take it up to removal, so.
I mean, there's laws now when you apply for a fence, it can only be so high, and he
Yeah.
takes care of measuring
But
that.
then nobody's changing it, like if this is just changeable from an app on the executive director's phone, you know, and it went.
Well, I think the active area cannot be greater than that.
Oh, yeah, I'm talking about the foot candles and the rest of.
Oh,
You
Yeah,
know.
the brightness of it can be adjusted at any point. I mean, who's gonna monitor that and how? That's a good question. I mean, is Kevin gonna go out and stand on the road with some kind of monitoring device to figure out if these people are within the guidelines? Have we thought about that at all?
We are thinking about it, yes.
yes.
But there, I don't see, I mean, maybe this law doesn't reflect any of that.
No, this is just a first draft, Dan.
Yep, yep. No, I was just wondering, I've never gone through this process before. That's why I'm just kind of thinking out loud with it.
No, I appreciate it. That's what these forums are for.
just for reference, the Family Health Network sign that they applied for
Mhm.
was about 25 square feet. So the
Really?
size, yeah. So that one, the active area of that. So that's 25 square feet.
How big is the Family Health Network sign down on Homer Ave?
I don't know. I mean, there's a reference
big.
of a person, right?
So basically a 3x4 sign, 3 feet by 4 feet on either side.
No, that was on one side. So their sign was like 3.5 feet by, I don't know what it was. I just,
So I think a proposed law would be, yeah, what you said, that 3x4.
Is what the laws.
Oh,
the
no
laws
greater
written
than.
oh
right
yeah,
now.
the new one,
Yeah.
yes, sorry, yes. Yep. So looking through some of this paperwork here, there's different ways to measure the brightness of these signs. You can measure the light that comes out of the sign or measure the light as it hits some surface. As it's written in here, this would be measuring the light as it hits some surface, which I think is what we would care about.
From a certain distance.
From a certain distance, yeah. But there are complications in that the surrounding light would affect what that measurement is, or how that feels to the eye, I think. Just something to think about, but I think it's the right way to measure it for us, but.
Yeah, the ambient light makes a big difference.
But it's written that it doesn't increase over the ambient by
Mhm.
0.3 foot candles. But I like that it's written that way. Yeah, I don't have much, I didn't have anything else that I'd written out. Did we want to try to put some sort of a recommendation together? Or do we have any questions for Dante? Hey, Dante. Pat, did
It's
you,
not really that.
he's there, he's always there. Did you want to run any of those questions by him about how the book and how it's
Oh.
written of the legislative body and the
Yeah, I don't know. Are you there, Dante?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi.
Hello, Adam.
Hi. I'm looking at page 7, 3A, where it says the ZBA has no jurisdiction regarding the granting of variances for the signs. And since the ZBA and the planning board are the administrative bodies, and the ZBA is the only board that has the power to interpret the laws or ordinance, well, laws here in the village, then does that mean that there is no appeal possible for an applicant who?
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're gonna change that portion there.
Okay,
This is a mock law, as I'm sure somebody gave a little introduction to at the beginning, or if not, I'd be happy to, but this is just to get a solicit ideas from the various boards when we put it together, and that's a particular section that is gonna change.
okay, because it's also on the special permit where it says special permit applications are made to the village board of trustees. And that again, you have to apply to an administrative body, not to a legislative body, so that doesn't fit, right? And then down on the bottom where it has the B, it says the application is made in writing to the code enforcement officer. So that's a conflict with 4A directly. That one says you go to the village board, even though you can't do that. Anyway, so if the application goes to the code enforcement officer and the ZBA has no jurisdiction up on 3A, then where is the appellate body that the applicant could go to? So there was that. And the other thing that I had was if it was possible to find some mechanism to give the permission for these signs to be specific to the applicant, and that an application would be made by either an owner or a lessee, and that the permission be specific to the applicant and not run with the land like zoning does. And I don't know what that mechanism would be, but maybe you could find something so that when the person who applied for the sign and that property then becomes something else, the something else doesn't automatically have this sign, and that might not be something that would have been approved. Okay, for example, we talked about it. I'm sorry for everybody else for repeating it, but one of those properties that's in both business and residential that are split, and it's used as a business. They apply for a sign. The sign is put up, and then the property is turned into a residence. Well, that residence now has an LED sign because there's no mechanism to remove it. Or a person puts up, I don't know, what do you have, some other kind of a business.
Parker's office, and then it turns into something else.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and that something else that purchased that property wouldn't have been necessarily eligible or approved for that sign. There's no mechanism for removing that approval if it's going to run with the land. So I think I'd like to make the suggestion that be looked into seriously to find some mechanism that sort of thing can happen, because otherwise we could just keep having more and more and more and more signs. And
Yeah, so maybe tie the association of the business to the permit or the sign is what you're saying.
well, however it works. Yeah. And did you hear, we also mentioned the possibility of, instead of applying it to B1s and B2s, coming up with an overlay zone somewhere in the village, possibly encompassing sections of 281, and have this apply not to B1 and B2, but rather to apply to a specific newly created overlay zone for signs, and to consider doing something like that.
Dante?
Yeah, no, those are all comments, and you should, combine them in sort of a resolution for consideration. I don't want to pick favorites or anything now, but if that's something you particularly feel, or as a board feel free to, give us the feedback we need.
No, Dante, you had mentioned that you guys had discussed the change, that one change regarding the jurisdiction and variances. Were there other changes that aren't on here that have been discussed as well that you'd like to that you could point out to us?
So there hadn't been any discussion. It's just one of those things that I'm keeping, but it has been brought up by so you guys have gotten it. The village planning board has also kind of seen a first draft, and Dan's been working on this issue for some time. But we also had a meeting earlier, geez, what was that? 2 weeks ago, I believe, with the planning board, and they have given us some feedback as well. I don't have all the resolutions or all the opinions they had. I don't know if Dan would has forwarded those to you or has those available, but we had a nice lively discussion with the planning board a couple weeks ago, and they gave us a fair amount of input as well.
I don't think we were thinking of coming up with resolutions, were we? We were just talking about ideas to be considered.
Yes.
Ideas, resolutions, however you call them is fine. We're just soliciting feedback, but as a board, you can resolve or just give us your ideas. Either works.
Dante, this is Pat. What we're looking for is we're looking for your feedback. So, but it has to be documented. And that's what we're looking for. So whether it's in a resolution.
Oh, you can document, that's different.
Or, well,
Okay, well, because we talked about that earlier, and Dan said that it was in the tape and transcript would have.
if it's in the tape, if it's in the minutes, but bottom line, the village board needs to be able to see what you guys are having the issues with, so we can address it. Making the village board go back and read through the tape is not conducive.
Right,
So-
sorry, just to jump in here, what Joe had mentioned and what we did in the planning. Whenever this discussion is over, you guys want to give the conclusion remarks saying, here's our point A, B, C, we went and looked at, that's the kind of thing we're looking for, and that's the thing that Joan will document.
Would it be possible for us and I don't know, maybe the planning board to have the next draft of it before they have a joint meeting that the public is invited to?
Yeah, I would imagine so, yes.
Because it seems like there's lots of places that people are concerned.
Okay, so do we want to go through and highlight kind of the points, then Joan can write them down and we can call them a resolution or a point of, hey, look over here.
Sure, good idea.
All right. Let's go by order of the law as it's written.
Are you coming up with your synopsis now?
Yes. Thank you, Joan. I think the first one, and Dan and Pat, please correct me. The first one that I remember and one that jumps out to me most is the permitted zones. It's currently written as B1 and B2
What page you on?
with the exception, page 6.
Section F.
Section F, yeah, A1.
Page 1,
No.
section F, little f, big F.
Big F.
Page 6. Big F.
Now it's 6, okay.
Sorry, 6 F1 A1.
And I think our recommendation would be to just, to designate an overlay district to a portion of 281.
Yeah,
We
I think we're all in agreement that that these exceptions as they're written would open them up to parts of the village that I don't think that I would not want to see these signs on.
And they
Should
just,
it be in all other zoning districts?
I would word it like you had mentioned before, maybe an overlay district rather than the wording as it is in F1 A1. Because even there's a B1 district, I think the bowling alley maybe is a B1 district. I don't think they're gonna put a sign in, but I don't think
they
would.
could, if you give them the
Yeah, they could.
option.
I
Surprised.
don't think another sign in the middle of there would be appropriate.
If it allows the churches, schools, and nonprofits in all other zoning districts, nonprofits is, especially with home-based businesses, and It's real easy to be a nonprofit.
I did the paperwork for my Frisbee club to be a nonprofit. So
Okay,
you
so
could-
you could put a sign up if we allow nonprofits in all other districts.
Yes, I think that it's a very loose wording that could open it up to a lot of options.
Frisbee.
There's people that will
What's
wait,
the next one?
I believe.
The next one,
I know we discussed an enforcement section, but I don't know if that's part of the law or what.
well, I think we'd like to put it down as something to be considered and addressed.
Yeah.
So we don't have to know how.
Right. So I guess,
Address
Joan, you could
enforcement.
write in there that we'd be interested in learning how the enforcement will be handled on these signs.
I think if you look back at how that sign was granted on the village green, that it was to change only once overnight. And that's not the case anymore.
Right, exactly.
And yeah,
Um,
You want to do page 7?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Did we want to mention anything about the operating hours for the hours of these signs?
Yeah,
I think, yeah. Joan, I think we probably need to, or not, don't need to do anything, but one suggestion would be to look at on page 7, section 9. It says operational electronic message signs between the hours of 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. is prohibited. Just wanted to call attention to something like a gas station currently has them on all night. And if there was a business that was open past 9 o'clock, do we intend to have them turn it off at 9 o'clock? Something to think about.
Kevin would be driving around the village at night, right? Lights that are on.
I feel we need to have plenty of people that would be driving.
Next one,
I don't know that we need to mention it here, but maybe make a note of the zoning board not having jurisdiction. I think that we would agree that that section needs changed. So page 7, 3A
And 4A.
and 4A.
Well, could I note that G1, we don't have an architectural review board. So
Yeah,
that
that's-
line,
That's just from the original law, that's all. So
correct,
this is not getting voted on, so
we forgot to erase that one.
that's not my doing. Talk to the lawyer about that.
Dante was getting paid by the word that day.
got another one?
Yeah, B. I don't know if it's G1, 2, then there's a 4A, B. And it says
Give me
the
a
application. That's on
Page
page 7.
7, 4B, Joan.
The application here it says goes to the code enforcement officer, which is a direct conflict with 4A above, which says the application goes to the board of trustees. And both of those are in conflict with 3A that says the ZBA has no jurisdiction, because then the question becomes, where is the appellate body, or which is the appellate body? And does the applicant then have no ability to appeal if the
Is
ZBA
that
has
the
no
one, is that
jurisdiction?
the one Dante said is from the
That's-
mock law?
That
Okay,
there- Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, yep. I
yeah,
think
we just want to make sure that they know our take on it.
gotcha. Next,
That written consent, if there's possible. Well,
Oh.
yeah,
tie it to the applicant.
yeah,
Okay, yeah, John, this is not in there anywhere. Patricia had a good idea about, if there was a variance granted for a sign, that variance would be tied to the applicant. And it wouldn't live with
I
that.
don't know that you want to say tied to the applicant, because the applicant could keep the property and put a different type of business in
Yeah.
there. So I
Yeah,
think
you're
it
right.
should be tied to the actual business that it's,
Tied to the use that was
Yeah.
yeah.
applied for.
Sounds good.
In other words, get rid of it if it's not there anymore.
No, if the sign is permitted for its specific use, as say a gas station, if the same guy owns it and puts a different business in there, he's got to apply for a new sign for that business.
Yeah,
I got,
But I don't think this would have, I mean, if it's in an allowed district, it wouldn't matter. They could just put up another sign if it met their criteria in the law.
right, but it would, or it would need to be removed if that was a residence. I couldn't, if I moved into the former church, which people were doing back in the day, made that a home, then I'd have my electronic sign outside because it came with the church.
I hope you look at the other recommendation and that one's not in there anyways, but
Really?
I get your point.
you got another one?
Is there any more?
I think that's all we got,
All
John.
right.
Yeah.
Well, my goodness. If you're done, then all you have to do is adjourn.
Boss.
Do I just say we adjourn? All right,
You done?
I think that's it. Thanks, everyone.